Hey there. I'm excited to announce this to you today. This is what you've been waiting for in your spiritual quest. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'm finally ready to announce it that it's ready to go. It's the Grief to Growth Community Circle. Now, this is a sanctuary where like-minded souls are united in their journey through grief and towards personal transformation. It's more than just a place. It's a beginning. It's a commitment to growth and understanding. Here you're finding not just a community, but you're entering a circle of trust and depth. You're going to engage with interactive coursework. You'll dive into exclusive podcast episodes and partake in discussions that illuminate the path from mourning to empowerment. This is a realm where every question is honored and every individual's journey is validated. To be part of this exclusive circle, visit us at grieftogrowth.com/community or look for the chat icon at the bottom of every page on the main website. Remember that entry is a privilege because I want to ensure that every member is as dedicated and genuine as you are. You must apply to join, but the journey within is worth every step. So go ahead and join us today. Check it out, grieftogrowth.com/community, and I look forward to seeing you there. Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hey, everybody. This is Brian back with another episode of Grief to Growth, and I've got with me today Roland Achenjang. And Roland is a young man I just met a couple of weeks ago. I was totally fascinated in talking to him about his background, about the book that he's written. And so this is going to probably be a pretty extensive episode, so I'll probably break it up into two parts. We'll just have to see how it goes. What I want to do is just give you a short introduction to Roland, and then I'll let him talk for himself. His bio that he presented to me says in 2014, he was struggling to manage the stress brought on by his attempts to meet his responsibilities. So as a last effort to coach, he made the conscious decision to look within, or to look in the one place he'd never looked before, which is within, which a lot of us don't think about doing. And Roland developed his own meditation practice as a self-taught meditator. Roland is also a pharmacist. He's an MBA. As I said, he's quite an accomplished young man. He's got his own podcast, which is called, look at my notes, or Conversations with Roland, I believe. Is that right? So it's called, Conversations with Roland. Again, fascinating young man. I don't want to spend a lot of time introducing him. I'll let him speak for himself. So I want to welcome Roland to Grief to Growth.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. That was a pretty sweet introduction too. Thank you.
Yeah, I like I said, meeting you a couple of weeks ago, we just had a conversation. I felt like a kindred spirit. We hit it off kind of right away. We were introduced by a mutual friend. So what I want to do today, or at least to begin with, I want to start talking about you and your experience. And we can start in 2014 if that's what you'd like to start, or start wherever you want. Just tell me about yourself.
It might be better if we go a little bit beyond or before 2014, just to set a background. I mean, 2013, 2014, pretty amazing time in my life. But I'm originally from West Africa, in a country called Cameroon is where I was born and raised. I lived there with my family until I was 14 years old. And that's when we all relocated to the United States. That in itself was a pretty life-altering experience. Right when it happened, I would say I was still pretty young and just excited to be leaving Cameroon to be moving to the United States. That the culture shock didn't really hit me until a couple years later, after I had settled in a little bit into the U.S. culture, and then started to compare and sort of contrast the differences, right? And then following that, there are just so many stories that we can talk about, but life continued to happen for me as it does for just about every other being that's experiencing life on Earth. I went through ups and downs. I had, many things to celebrate in my life, as well as many things that I thought didn't make sense. One way I put it is my rational mind was beginning to fail me. My beliefs were getting challenged left and right, more so just because, a lot of the foundational beliefs I had were molded within the Cameroonian culture, right? And then you come to the United States, whole different ballgame, trying to make sense of all of it. And the challenges didn't stop. At the same light, I did well. I mean, I went to school, graduated, went to college, and then got my PharmD degree in 2010. Ended up working in a couple of hospitals. And by 2013, I was in Nashville, Tennessee, and that's where I was working. And this was shortly after the Affordable Care Act had been passed. Okay. And so, in my in my genius at the time, I thought, man, I've been working as a pharmacist for 2 years, 3 years. And again, I was getting all this, the metaphor would be check engine lights kept coming on. Like something is off here. Something doesn't make sense. The real world isn't adding up. And so I thought maybe if I go get a business degree for many reasons, that would help sort of get rid of this check engine lights that kept coming up. And so I decided to enroll in business school, and I was working full time as a pharmacist and going to business school. Beautiful school, Belmont University down in Nashville. During that time is when things got really, really, stressful. I could not ignore, quote unquote, the check engine light anymore. I really couldn't ignore it, and I had to find a way to cope. That's when I picked up a practice. I call it meditating now. At the time, I didn't even know what I was doing. I had just given up on trying to make sense of life using my rational mind, using my analytical mind, using my scientific mind, using my religious upbringing mind. And I just thought I'm just going to, quote, literally go lay in my bed one day after work, listen to my body, right? Everything about my body, everything about my being, my thinking, how my toes feel, just listen to my body and then hear what it has to tell me. I mean, just literally out of frustration, I decided that on a whim. And then did some research about meditating. Some things turned me off on the different meditating practices that we can get into in this conversation or another one. But then that was it. And I say it like it was, just easygoing after that. Very interesting experiences began to happen and life moved on. One thing led to another. Usually the word in the spiritual community is synchronicities that, you just can't plan for. And then ended up 4 years later developing this meditating practice that I was disciplined enough to maintain daily, averaging about 2 hours a day. And on the fateful Tuesday morning of August 21st, 2018, had a spiritual awakening, a spiritual transformative experience. Most people would refer to this as a Kundalini awakening in the Christian sense, if I'm, using my own interpretations and understanding of those teachings, is receiving the Holy Spirit in a very profound way, or getting in touch with the intelligence that is the source from which all creation comes, interacting with that intelligence, and then remembering all these facets and fascinating things about who I am, which is basically a universal understanding of why you are as well, Brian, and everyone who's listening. And it really helped me at that point put a check on the engine light, as in, oh my goodness, now everything sort of makes sense in a way that I could not have previously understood, not having had the spiritual awakening. And then following that, I wrote my book, which is another funny story. I published that in a year after that fateful Tuesday morning. And then, again, things just continued to build from there. Ended up learning different energy healing practices. A lot of it was building up on the practices that I was doing to myself while meditating. These are all self-taught. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, well, given all the lessons I've learned, I have to start living them out. And so the podcast came about, and then connections. And now I am here talking with you, Brian.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a few questions. So you mentioned, you came from Cameroon. You were like 14 years old. So, and then you go through school and everything. Sounds like you were very successful, as we would use the terms. You graduated with the PharmD, which is not an easy thing to do, but something was kind of off, when what you had was, I think a lot of us would call a dark night of the soul. So what type of things were off? What was creating the check engine light for you?
Oh, that's a great question. I love it. So many things. And I'll tell you one story to just try to paint a picture of what I mean by my check engine lights kept coming on. So growing up in Cameroon, I was raised in the Catholic faith. And I started doctrine classes when I was 8 years old, for instance, right? And we learned everything our teachers taught us about Jesus Christ, a lot of Christian upbringing stories in the Bible to help guide you and help you build sort of a moral code on which you would then use to develop your life through. But amongst the stories where, there was this aspect of Jesus Christ's life and his birth specifically that I had never, ever heard otherwise, that he was the only son of Mary, conceived by the Holy Spirit. And Joseph was sort of his stepfather, or his father, essentially, right? And Jesus Christ was the Savior. And most of us know this story. Mm-hmm. So this was my upbringing up until I was 14. Fast forward the spring of 2001. I am in Platteville, Wisconsin, my uncle's house, watching the History Channel. So this was right around Easter break. Mm-hmm. And on the History Channel, there's a documentary about the life of Jesus Christ. And this is an individual who I just like the entire world, I'm super fascinated by. Like, why? What was so special about him, etc. I mean, he did so many things, so many miraculous things, an amazing teacher. And I'm enamored by this documentary. So I'm really, caught up in it, watching the stories. And a lot of it is building on the foundation of the stories that I had been exposed to growing up in Cameroon. Now, another interesting aspect about this is growing up back home, I did not have the luxury to watch reenactments of the stories of Jesus Christ. A lot of it was what I was either reading or being taught by a teacher, right? Sure. And we know the power of pictures, especially moving pictures as in documentaries and reenactments.
Yeah.
Now, in the middle of all of this, I'm fully engrossed. I hear the narrator mention that Jesus Christ had brothers and sisters who were born of Mary and of Joseph. Now, to your listeners, and maybe even to you, that sounds, oh yeah, of course, he did. It's in the Bible. It's here and there. To me, in that moment, right, 2001, that was earth-shattering for me. If I can channel in, Stephen A. Smith, the blasphemy that I heard out of this narrator was earth-shattering. I stopped in my tracks. I couldn't pay attention anymore. And I, in my, genius as a 15-year-old, less than 1 year in the United States, was enamored on contacting the History Channel to tell them, stop spreading these BS lies. Why are you indoctrinating the American people with this BS lies? Jesus did not have siblings. He was the only son of Mary, conceived of the Holy Spirit. How dare you right? I mean, the blasphemy.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my frustration and not being able to make sense of this, I turned the TV off in the middle of this and walk away. And I was done with it. And that's an example of a first, one of many examples, essentially, of when my check engine light came on.
Mm-hmm.
My foundational beliefs were seriously challenged.
Yeah.
What do you mean Jesus had siblings? I have never heard that for 15 years on this planet. And those are the kind of things I mean. My rational mind was failing me. Yeah. And over time, I would have experiences like that and just wash them under the rug, or find another sort of justification or come up with some reasoning to help me feel centered.
Yeah.
But as those began to grow and add on, it came to literally a head. I had to make a decision. I either continue to live this sort of life that doesn't make sense and just navigate through this fog and then hope that something happens, or make sense of the fog.
Yeah. It's interesting as you tell that, because I can relate so much to it. I was raised as a Pentecostal and was raised with a very fundamental, literal interpretation of the Bible. And I remember when I was a young man, I was in my 20s or 30s, I guess, and I started hearing people push back against the creation story. And I always thought it was literal. And I was like, how am I going to make sense of this? And I actually, the young earth, the Creation Museum is down in Kentucky, which is close to you and I both. You're in Louisville, and I'm in Cincinnati. There's a Creation Museum near here. And this guy, Ken Ham, they put together this argument to say that creation was real. And I'm a chemical engineer by trade. So my background is like, I'm a rational person. And I'm like, yeah, it's real. So I get into it and I'm reading all their stuff. And then I read the other side. And then I remember reading a book about this guy was taking the Bible and not taking it literally, Genesis, but saying that it was a period of 7 like ages or something, and explaining how we could have both creationism and this kind of an old earth theory. And I was sitting on my deck and I remember I lifted up my eyes and I looked out and like the whole world just suddenly looked different. It's like I suddenly understood, how God, quote, created this thing. And it blew my mind. So I'm just relating to the experiences that you went through, because I had a series of those, and it creates a crisis, right? It's like, well, what else do I believe is not real?
Exactly. Like, who else is playing games with me and telling me, stories or tales, literally tales? And what am I supposed to do with those tales? And then you start going into, this conversations in your mind of what's right, what's wrong. And then if it hits a bigger head, like me, I was a pharmacist, and in healthcare, oh my goodness, just so many check engine lights are coming on. And we do amazing things in the healthcare industry, right? As pharmacists, as medical doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists, radiologists, etc. We do so many amazing things. Mm-hmm. But I've always also been, deeply philosophical without actually knowing this. I never took any philosophy classes in school, to be honest. And it was only in asking this questions and trying to make sense of my earth life experience that I, realized that I had this side to me. And in talking to a priest one day, he was actually the first person to call me that, where I don't want to say debating, but I was trying to paint a picture of how, I grew up not believing that Jesus Christ had siblings. Mm-hmm. And his answer was very straightforward to me. He goes, well, you should have just read the Bible. And it seems super obvious, right? Just read the Bible. But then again, are you telling me all of these people who were teaching me this and teaching all of us this didn't read the Bible? And then you get into these nuances of, well, they did read the Bible, and then, everyone starts coming up with the justifications of, okay, yeah, well, Catholics read the Bible, but they don't study it. And everyone's coming up with these reasons for why I never learned that Jesus Christ had siblings. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, what you're each demonstrating is basically what I've come to learn, is that amongst many things, we are a product of our environments.
Yeah.
And those environments are as diverse as we are. And even beyond that, if you look at your environment, there's still many outcomes to how people perceive reality, even though they came from the same environment and the same teachings that you had. And I started to now go back into those and question. And then those were the kind of things that led me to saying, but wait a minute. And it was a little it was a little bit egoistical, but it was seriously, how can I make sense of this reality if I continue to let other people tell me what it is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And the Bible, I think, is a great, it's kind of a Rorschach test. We see what we want to see. We see what we look at. And for me, when I started coming out of some of the teachings like eternal hell and Jesus is the only way to be saved and all that stuff, and I was told that that's the way it reads. And then I started talking to some other people who read the same Bible and said, well, no, we see it totally different. That, everybody is saved and there's no eternal hell. And, and I'm like, well, wait. It's the same book, but we're all reading it different ways and we're all getting different things out of it. So, I think it's interesting that we come to, and I think it's a common story. We come to, like I said, a dark night of the soul. We all come to it differently and it's all manifested differently, but we come to a point where it's like, it's just not working anymore. So what made you decide, do you think, to turn within? Because a lot of times at that point, people will go, well, who can I find to tell me the truth? But you decide to turn within.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, something I want to tell you about today. My podcast platform, Buzzsprout, has recently made it easier for me to allow you to support me financially. Go to www.grieftogrowth.com/subscribe. That's grief2growth.com/subscribe. And once you're there, you can sign up to support me financially. Now, you can do it for as little as $3 a month or, of course, as much as you'd like. If you do that, you'll get access to bonus episodes, and you'll see those in the regular feed. They'll have a lock on them. But when you become a subscriber, you'll actually get access to your own private feed, and you'll be able to listen to the regular podcast along with the bonus podcast for the subscribers. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for sharing the podcast. And I want to thank those of you who support me financially. Have a great day, and on to the episode.
Yes, another great question, Brian. And again, with me at that point, I had reached a space in my life where I had experienced quite a bit already, right? I was a practicing pharmacist, so I knew that at least from a scientific background specific to the practice of medicine and in my field, nobody was really going to tell me. I mean, I was talking to pharmacists all the time, and many of them weren't even interested in the kind of questions I was asking, right? And so I just knew that at that point, I couldn't find another colleague to talk about this with. I'll even share an example of the story. There's one evening I'm working with a colleague, and this patient gets admitted in the ER, and they have elevated liver enzymes. And so the doctors do the workup, they order the labs, and then they admit the patient to the hospital. And I'm following the patient through from the ER to admissions on the floor. And I'm looking at the treatment plan for this patient and the medications that, we intend to give this patient. And what I find out, or what I realize quickly, is even though I'm not saying that this is what happens with everyone, I have to preface that with this, but is we weren't really treating the underlying elevated liver enzymes in this case. We admitted this patient to the hospital and gave him a room to basically rest, because every medication we gave him was what we call comfort meds, which are usually things like Tylenol as needed for pain. So you're not really going to get the Tylenol unless you're complaining about pain. Medications for constipation as needed. Everything was as needed. And then IV fluids, which is literally rehydrating you, right? And that's what we gave this patient. And I'm looking at this, and it suddenly dawned on me that for these patients in particular, we're basically giving them a place to rest, or quote unquote meditate, and sort of get rid of maybe life's challenges that would be causing them additional stress, and then making it difficult for this body or their body's autonomic regulatory system to kick in and then fix the underlying issue. And I look over at my pharmacist and I go, hey man, are you looking at this? Like, we're literally giving this person a place to rest, which to me sounded a little bit like, oh, meditate, right? And those are the kind of things I was seeing. And then another reason why I decided to go within again was basically that the answers I was looking for weren't in pharmacy, weren't in healthcare, weren't in religion. Because again, I was raised Catholic, but I came to the United States and my Catholic upbringing in Cameroon was different, right? There were different interpretations in the same faith. And then I started to learn about so many other religions, Muslims, right? Hindu, even Scientology, and then old religions, Greek mythology, Egyptians, etc. And you begin to see these underlying stories that are the same. There's a story of creation. There's always a battle. There's a fall of man somehow. There's a redeemer that comes in. There are changes to the stories. The more I began to learn about these different aspects of religious teachings, the more I began to see the similarities and how they had differentiated from each other. And then also how they were very, very dependent on the times and the cultures in which they were being spread, right? So I was seeing how the Catholic Church was changing over time, for instance, and I thought, isn't this sort of like maybe political in a way? But the one big thing was this, Brian. It was, well, if the founders of these religious practices, right, the founders upon which a lot of these religious practices are based, were souls who were born on this planet, what is it that they did? What is it that they had available to them that I currently have today? And amongst everything, it wasn't the actual religion, for one, right? It wasn't current technological practices that we experience or we get involved in. It wasn't healthcare the way we currently practice. It was their physical bodies, their ability to breathe, their ability to think. And I thought there's something there. And I looked around and I saw that everybody had a physical body, the ability to breathe, the ability to think. And lo and behold, I had one too.
Yeah.
So I said, well, this is the one place I have never looked. I've never just paid attention to my body unless it was hurt or unless I had a cold or something. And I thought, what if I just consciously did this? And mind you, many people had meditating practices, transcendental meditation, Kriya, Kundalini. But I was also turned off by those in a way, just because in my own judgment and perceptions, I started to see similarities in those practices and then other, at least in my mind, Catholic upbringing. And I'll give you an example. So mantras, for instance, I said, well, those sound like prayers. You're repeating things after a while. You're just saying them. You're kind of lost in them. You don't even know what they mean. So I said, okay, I don't want any mantras. Mala beads. They're like, you can meditate with mala beads. And it's like, that looks like a rosary to me.
Yeah.
You're moving beads, you're saying prayers, you may be uttering mantras at the same time. And so I said, okay, no, I'm just going to go with what I came to this planet with. And that was naked Roland. I mean, I had clothes on when I was meditating, but I mean, just my physical body. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Roland, because as I went through my journey, I was taught, trust your teachers, trust the Bible, and I went through kind of the same thing. So I started going out. I started looking at different ways of interpreting the Bible. I started reading books and stuff. And I think it takes a lot for us to start really trusting ourselves, especially with that indoctrination when we're kids. I don't know if you got this, but I was told that the heart is evil, that the heart is wicked, and you can't trust your own instincts. You've got to read the Bible to understand what's really real. But things start to open up when like you said, you start to look at. Because for me, I looked at meditation, and my background was like, okay, meditation's bad. That's evil. So I found this thing called contemplative prayer. And so I'm reading books about contemplative prayer, and I'm like, well, this is just meditation. You read a verse, or you say it over and over again, or the mala beads are the same as the rosary beads. So I think we come to the conclusion, it's like, well, it's all kind of the same thing. So when you started your meditation practice, you said you didn't call it meditation. You just called it, what did you have a label for it?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I mean, the best thing I would say is I was spending time with myself as much as I could, because, you do touch on a lot of good points too, Brian. You talk about reading other books. I had started reading a little bit, and one of the first books I read that was really great for me was The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine.
Mm-hmm.
And in that book, he just basically lets the reader, look at the other side of the stories in the Bible, or like religious teachings. And I thought it was fascinating. And one of the things he pointed out was how much power we sort of give a creation of source, in the sense that, right, we have this fallen angel who is now, quote unquote, the devil or Satan, and we fear him just as much as we fear the source. And he was saying, but if this being is a creation of the source, how did he get to be so big that we are basically enabling, empowering, and fearing this being so much that, it's basically the biggest message in a lot of religious teachings is there's this being that is so bad. The creator doesn't want to get rid of it, but it's so bad. The only way to get rid of it is if you come to us, and we'll help you, and we'll show you how, and we'll teach you how. And so in reading, those are the kind of things that made me think. And then I also began to wonder, but how did he get at this conclusion? Who did he talk to, right? And that was just spending time, I would imagine, with himself, and thinking and analyzing, and trying to make sense of reality. And another piece too was, again, the check engine lights didn't stop. And I would do things, Brian, consciously that I knew were, based off of my upbringing and conditioning, the right things to do, expecting to experience similar right things. And I would not. I would experience the total opposite. And so I thought, well, something is off. And then I would do things consciously that were the wrong things to do, sometimes because it benefited me in a selfish way. And it would turn out okay. And then there were times when I could care less, and I would experience the outcome of both like a good outcome and a bad outcome. And so it was just all confusing. Even more so, if you look at the background from which I came from a country that, for lack of better words, is literally a third world country. It's underdeveloped. It has a lot of potential that's not been tapped into, right? And I come to this country where it's so developed, the problems we're facing here don't even resonate with what I would say, not that with what I would say, with the problems that my fellow Cameroonians are facing back home, or in any other, like third world country, for instance. I mean, I'm working in the hospital, for instance, and we're getting mad, and we're saying things like, the interoperability of our electronic medical records suck. I can't share my data with another hospital because we're not on the same electronic medical records.
Yeah.
I go back home to Cameroon, Brian, and it's like, okay, we don't have roads. We don't have water. There's no running water. You're getting up in the morning to go.
We'll get back to Grief to Growth in just a few seconds. Did you know that Brian is an author and a life coach? If you're grieving or know someone who is grieving, his book, Grief to Growth, is a best-selling, easy-to-read book that might help you or someone you know. People work with Brian as a life coach to break through barriers and live their best lives. You can find out more about Brian and what he offers at www.grieftogrowth.com, www.growth.com, or text growth, GROWTH, to 31996. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/grieftogrowth, www.patreon.com/GRIEF, to make a financial contribution. And now, back to Grief to Growth.
Go to the stream to carry water to come back. It's just a different world.
Yeah. Yeah. First world problems, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But it's on the same planet. And if you put yourself, as much as you can, if you put yourself in my shoes, it's like, how can this same planet where we are currently experiencing life have this much diversity in experience? And then you couple all of that with your own personal experience and how you're contributing to all of it. The guilt you might feel, because Catholic teachings are really good at making you feel guilty, right? Mm-hmm. The guilt I felt of, okay, I'm in America. Why should I be complaining about this? When I go back to Cameroon, you're like, whoa, it's a different place, mm-hmm. different experiences, different problems. And then your own problems, you try to complain when you're back home, people just think you're ungrateful.
Yeah.
But those are the kind of things that led me to say, okay, if there is a source of creation that we're all seeking, and if there are these myriad ways that we're all experiencing life on earth, how do we reconcile both? And that's why I said, nothing is helping me reconcile both. Reconcile the pain, reconcile the suffering, reconcile the differences, reconcile the for lack of better words, the shenanigans. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And that was again, many of the reasons why I decided, there's something here that we're missing. Where is it? What are the enlightened beings talking about? Right. Mm-hmm. How do we find it?
So you developed this technique, and I talk to people about meditation, and a lot of us are turned off by the idea of meditation. We say, I can't sit for 5 minutes without, falling asleep or just being bored out of my mind or driven crazy by my own thoughts. So what was your experience like when you first started meditating?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near-death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe the NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.growth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it.
Oh, great question. So the very first day was actually a morning I was walking home after work, because I was working night shift, mind you. So this was another reason why I say the check engine lights were now just too many. I would go to work from 9 p.m. to 8 a.m. And then before going to work, I would go to class from 6 p.m. to like 8:45 p.m. and then leave and go to work. So I was doing this and sleeping during the day. So the first time I decided I would just sit in my bed, in my bedroom, I had blackout curtains. My room looked like Batman's cave. This is true. And again, it was just because I slept during the day and worked at night. So I sat in my bed, and what I decided to do was literally pay attention to as much as I can about my current being. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what would happen. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't even know how to do it. I didn't know where I would start or anything like that. I just thought I would lay there or sit there and then see what happens. And the very first time I did it, within like 5 minutes, because this was out after work, I passed out. I was gone. I mean, I slept. I was so exhausted. And then I wake up, and once I woke up now, I was a little more rested, and I tried it again. And instantly, just laying there and trying to pay attention to my being, my mind is racing, right? All kinds of thoughts, this, that, drama here, drama there, class this, work this. My technicians are mad at me. My boss is probably not happy that I was maybe late to work. Everything's coming on, right? I feel awful. At the time, my back was hurting like crazy. I thought I had a pinched nerve that I needed surgical intervention to heal. I was missing my family because I wasn't seeing anybody anymore. I was just really this lonely being. It sounds really sad, but it was. I looked back and I thought maybe I was clinically depressed. All of this is going on. And then all of a sudden, I see this twirling light, right? And it's just colorful and it's very distinct. And it looks like a blurb, but it's right there and just turning in my third eye. And so I get enamored by it. And that was what my attention now became focused on. And as the light is turning, I'm just watching it. And I'm freaking out at the same time. Like, what is this? Right? Nobody up to that point had ever told me this was possible. Not in business school at the time, not in pharmacy school. The idea that you could lay in your bed after waking up in your best attempt to pay attention to yourself. Sorry, I'm laughing. It sounds crazy, but I see this light twirling in my third eye. I had no idea what a third eye was at the time. And I'm thinking, what is this? What is this? And it goes on for a while and then it stops. And I wake up. I remember I went to class that day and I was so alert. I mean, I was awake. And I paid attention in class that afternoon, evening, and I just being alert, like, oh my goodness, and I didn't know what happened. And so I would come back and then continue the practice where I would sit and pay attention to myself. Now, while I was doing this, those experiences began to build on themselves. Soon the light turned into my hands would now start moving throughout my body, kind of like in a scanning position. My fingers would move through my body as if I was playing piano keys. Sometimes my hand would move by itself. I'd like to pause here and say this. If you recall, I grew up in Cameroon in West Africa. If anything wasn't of religious Christian teaching that you were experiencing outside of what this realm could explain, it was witchcraft.
Exactly. Devil.
Now, I don't know how else to explain it. Maybe I use the word voodoo. But here in America, the whole idea of witchcraft is it's very different. Back in Cameroon, it's a taboo. I mean, a taboo. Even the whole idea of meditating is a taboo. That's witchcraft stuff. Don't bring that. What do you mean meditating? What's that? You're going to make us go crazy. You're going to. So if you can appreciate where I was as this kid who's really just starting to dabble into paying attention to himself, and I'm having all these experiences, and my conditioning to that point was, this ain't supposed to be happening. The red lights were, this is witchcraft, right? And I knew, and I was convinced that I had been possessed by the devil, right? So that was my thinking. I was like, oh, the devil's gotten hold of Roland. He's now moving his hands in weird ways. What the heck is this? But here was the kicker, Brian. I would meditate and have these experiences, and they would build on themselves. One day, my hand might just move an inch, and then I would stop and freak out. Then the next day, it might move 3 inches, and my whole hand would start moving and moving through my body. And as this built on themselves, I would freak out and stop in the moment, but then realize how much better I was feeling, and then build up the courage to continue the practice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's really fascinating here because, as I said, I can relate so much to your story. I was raised Pentecostal apostolic, which is similar. Everything outside of the church has got to be the devil and stuff. But you had gotten to the point where it's like, I'm going to trust myself. I'm going to trust my own experiences and go with it. I think that's so powerful that you were able to do that. And the other thing I think is really cool is when you started to meditate, you had no expectations. For myself and a lot of other people were like, okay, well, how do I do this? And what am I supposed to experience? And that can mess us up, in our own minds, because we were like, am I doing it right? And you were just free. And maybe that's why you were able to have such an amazing breakthrough as quickly as you did.
That is true. I mean, that's certainly part of it. And I created this 6 proven paths to effective meditating guide. And that is one of the paths I talk about in looking back at my experience. Now, I did have goals. So I started meditating because I needed help, amongst other things, to cope with my work and school stress, right?
Right.
I had no idea it would become this spiritual practice at all, and that it would lead to a spiritual awakening and this life-altering and life-transforming experience. But the whole idea of not trying to guide it to help me cope with work and school stress only definitely played a role in that as I was meditating and having these experiences, I was exploring it. And the cool thing was it was actually simultaneously helping me cope with the stresses of work and school.
Yeah.
And so today I say, if you are thinking about meditating, regardless of why, as long as it is your why, as long as you say, okay, this is why I want to do this, and you're disciplined enough to continue the practice, right? Focused, or even I'll just say with the intention of achieving your why, this will also happen for you. I'm not this unique individual who all of a sudden figured out something that has not been part of the human race since we started to incarnate on this planet. Even more so, given my background, there is no upbringing of mine that would have said Roland would be able to find a sense of state of being that he currently has through meditating, because this is not part of my culture growing up in Cameroon.
Yeah.
Today, if I even mention this to my, fellow Cameroonians, a lot of them, they tell me, hey, take a hike with this witchcraft stuff. Don't dabble in that stuff.
Yeah.
Today I appreciate that very much, right? Especially following my awakening. I do, because these fears are what are creating the current Earth life experience that we're having. And these fears are really based off of your upbringing, your conditioning, the lessons you chose to come and learn in this current life. And the way you choose to overcome the fears are entirely yours. And the cool thing is, the more fears you overcome, the more you expand your consciousness. And then eventually you start to see life from an entirely different perspective, which is what I think is where I am today.
Yeah, I think it's like I said, as I hear you, when we met a couple weeks ago, I was like, I can just see myself in you, but I see a lot of other people also. And when you talk about your meditation technique, I work with a guy named Kelvin Chen, who's taught meditation all around the world. And one of the things that I've gotten from Kelvin over the last several months I've known him is like, stop expecting so much and stop worrying about whether you're doing it right or wrong. And he had a period of time after his mother passed away, he was trying to get back to his meditation, and he said he would just cry. And he finally realized that was my meditation. It was just to sit there and to be with my own feelings. So I say this to our listeners, not so much to you, is that if you're trying to meditate, stop trying. Just do it and trust that you're doing whatever you're doing is the right thing for you. And we all have different experiences. I've been meditating myself for several years now, and every day for about I'm coming up on 4 years, I guess it is. But my experiences are not like yours, and that's okay. But listening to your experiences, that could be, I think, inspirational to all of us, and realize, that you got what Roland needed at the time with your experiences. So you're doing this meditation, and you're getting hooked on it. You're going longer and longer. You start off for 5 minutes, and now you're up to a couple hours a day. So
Yes. Now I average about 2 hours a day.
So when you had your I'm going to call it an awakening, and was it 2018? What was that like? What was the experience of that like?
That that was fascinating. So I'll take you back a couple of months leading up to that day.
Okay.
And then fun fact too, that August 21st, 2018 was exactly a year to the date where we had that national solar eclipse move across the United States. Mm-hmm. It was August 21st, 2017 when that eclipse happened. And it was only about, 6 months after my awakening where I was looking at the glasses that we had to look at the solar eclipse that I saw the date on there. And okay. I thought, whoa, that's odd. That was a year to the date. But I digress. Sorry. To answer your question, about 6 months, a couple of months prior to that, part of my meditating practice was still requiring me to adopt these yoga positions. Now, I've not mentioned that yet, but the kriyas, my hand movements, those began, like I said, to build on themselves to the point where my entire body was being moved into yoga positions and yoga poses. And it was in that realization, or it was during those experiences, that I also appreciated that, everything that we do is really a child of source. When you connect to source, you start to do these things. And it made sense to me in that way. Another interesting thing about these yoga poses that I adopt in the midst of meditating is how fine-tuned and accurate they are. It's not like going to a yoga class. I could go to a yoga class and actually get stressed out even more. Because the poses and the flows that the yoga instructor are putting me through isn't necessarily what my body needs energetically at the time. In deep meditation, these yoga poses that I'm going through are exactly what my body needs. And there's a synchronicity to the entire movement and my breathing. It seems like a symphony. I'm flexing the right muscles at the right time. I'm breathing just the right amount of depth and releasing at the right time. Sometimes it's even a fire breath where it's faster. So all these aspects of all these different meditation and yoga and breathing techniques become part of my experience without me consciously saying, I need to do this now. It's just letting go deeper and deeper into the meditating practice. But one of these yoga positions I was trying to adopt was a boat pose. It was like a deep boat pose where, as my butt was on the floor and my legs were raised up, my torso was also raised up. But then I had to connect my hands to my legs and hold them. And so it kind of looks like a triangle in a way. And I tried to hold that pose many times. I'd be meditating and I'd end up on the floor, raise my legs, and then try to hold it and then balance myself in that position. And when I did, I would fall. Every time I do it, every time I attempt it, I would fall. On this Tuesday morning, I kid you not, I'm sleeping in my bed and something wakes me up. And I get this urge deep within, hey, don't do anything right now. Go meditate. This is the time to go do it. And because I've started to build on receiving these intuitive messages, not doubting it, I get out of my bed right on the edge there, start meditating. I end up on the floor again. My legs, right, same pose. My legs go up, my back straightens up, and then my hands interlock my toes, and then bam. For the very first time, I was able to stabilize. I was strong enough and calm enough to stabilize myself in that position. And as I held it, I could feel this vibration in the base of my spine, and I hear a pop, and then this energy frequency or this energy ball moves right from the base to the crown of my head. And I feel it right through my spine. As one energy wave moves up, I go, oh. Now, me exclaiming, oh, was actually me remembering all this information about who I was and why I was. And with every wave of energetic movement, there were three distinct. The first one comes up and I go, oh. The second one comes up and I go, oh my goodness, that's true. And then the third one, it was just a full foot on, my goodness, that's who I am. That's why I am here. And this is true for everybody. Now, there were only 3 waves. We have 7 main chakras, depending on who you talk to.
Mm-hmm.
But with those 3 waves, I had built this strong foundation. And I believe I was actually opening my lower 3 chakras, like literally opening them. That the entire Earth life experience made sense to me. A metaphor would be, all right, you have a 1 million puzzle piece, but it's in a box and you don't know what the puzzle is. That's Earth life. Now, with this awakening experience, I was able to put all the puzzle pieces together and I could see the picture. And it was this divine creation. And I, looking back, I always think I should have stayed on and then maybe gone all 7 waves. But I was so excited, I stopped. I let go, ran upstairs, opened my back door, and looked out my backyard. And I could see my car. I could see a storage shed right next to my car. Across the street from me was Main Street in this small town where I lived in. I could see cars moving and honking. My neighbor's house, her car. The wind hit my face. I could see brushes on the left side of my house, which was kind of like property boundaries, right? Where it's like, this is where our property ends. And it was separating my house from what was a photo studio at the time. And then I looked at the clouds, and the sky was blue, patches were out, there was the sun shining, and all of this. There was actually like a little dry clothes hanging rack outside too, just some wires. All of this stuff, I looked at it, and all I could say was, holy crap. This is it. This is consciousness. This is, for lack of a better word, this is the God we're looking for. All of this, including me, is God interacting with itself as unique expressions of itself. It was so beautiful. I was like laughing and crying at the same time. And I felt like, I really felt in that moment, after remembering all of this, like the butt to the best joke ever told. Literally, I thought, this is good. And I was just thinking, wow, whoever or whatever designed such an experience, you got us. Like, this is amazing. What? We're all the same thing? Yes. Having a unique experience? Yes. Designed to teach us that we are all the same thing? Yes. What? And so I go back downstairs, and I'm on a high, Brian, for an entire week. I can't sleep a full night. I can't do anything. I go to work that day, and I couldn't work. And I'm just spewing all this just consciousness, basically just statements, and everything's making sense. I'm trying to tell my coworkers about this, and I literally sounded manic. That's how happy I was. I was too happy to function. I mean, I'll be honest, that whole day, 8 hours, I didn't do anything at work. I was just basically walking around laughing and smiling at people as in, do you realize how amazing and brave you are to be here? Do you even understand what you're doing? Do you get it? Do you remember? That's the word. Do you remember? And of course they didn't. Of course they thought I was insane. And being pharmacy director, right? It's like, hey, Roland, you're supposed to dispense the drug to our patients, right? Stop taking them,
Yeah.
stop taking them. But that's how I felt. And I would come home and have hours of conversations with myself, which were basically downloads, is one way to say it, right? An expanded consciousness. So I was getting all this information and all these explanations come through, and I would write them on my phone. I would audio record them. And that was the genesis of what eventually became my book. I would call my wife and talk to her for hours, and she felt the same way. She's like, okay, what's going on? Why are you so happy? And if you don't mind, I'll share this story just to kind of paint a picture of just how happy I was, to the point where I wasn't even like, you can't function on this planet in that state of being.
Yeah,
you can't maintain it.
I just want to,
you can, but
I want to interject because I think it's a really good point. Because when I'm listening to you talking, I've got a big smile on my face, and it reminds me when I talked to Mary Terhune, who had a similar experience, and when we get into your book, I want to talk about this whole idea, because the idea of death of the ego, right? But you were saying you couldn't function. You couldn't go to work and do the normal thing. And she said the same thing. She went to work and she was worthless. So I think it's a really interesting point that you brought up there. But yeah, go ahead and tell the story.
Oh yeah, no, Mary, she's an amazing lady too, and we connected through actually the same mutual friend who connected us too. So, and I was also very fascinated with her story. Through meditating, she had an awakening experience as well.
Mm-hmm.
But just to paint a picture of what I mean by my life literally changed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the same time, my wife, beautiful lady, beautiful soul, so brave as well to incarnate on this planet and then choose to experience life with my with my behind. She was in the midst of applying into medical schools. Now, up to that week, I was going based off of my experience, which was I only applied to two pharmacy schools, and I got into both of them, and I picked one.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my ego and selfishly, my argument was only apply to one or two medical schools. But she said, no, I want to apply to 15, 20 medical schools. And I thought that's ridiculous. You know how much money you're going to spend applying to all these schools? Then what the schools are going to do, because that's what they do, is they invite everybody to come and interview. But at the end, you're only going to go to one school. So why waste all this energy going talking to all these people, making it difficult for you to even make a decision afterwards on which medical school you want to go to?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because you have to, as part of the match process, you have to pick which schools are your favorite. And then if there's a match, or if you get admitted there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I was so enamored that she only applied to two medical schools, which was, it was selfish. It was also based off of my experience, as in, you don't need this many. Quit stressing yourself out. And then also, I didn't want to spend that much money applying to all this. And then on top of that, you had to fly and travel and all of this. I'm like, don't do this, right? Mm-hmm. After my awakening, after remembering who we were and why we were, when she mentioned, she called and she's like, okay, we need to talk about this. And I'm so happy, right? I was like, sweetie, if you want to apply to 50 medical schools, go for it. It doesn't even matter. Listen, you're going to end up where you need to be. And all these applications that you're going to apply are part of your learning experience. It's part of your uniqueness. So go for it, right? And I'm so happy and so supportive and so positive. And it was unusual. She freaked out. She was like, okay, but what is going on, right? That's just an example of how life was for me that entire week. Yeah.
Hey, everybody, that's the end of part one of my interview with Roland. Go ahead and find part two, where we really get into talking about his book. This first part has been talking about his life experience. Part two, we're going to talk about the book. I think you're really going to enjoy it, and I'll see you there.
That's it for another episode of Grief to Growth. I sure hope you got something out of it. Please stay in contact with me by reaching out at www.grieftogrowth.com. That's growth2growth.com. Or you can text the word growth to 31996. That's simply text growth, GROWTH, to 31996. Since you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure you're subscribed. So hit the subscribe button and then hit the little bell here, and it'll notify you when I have new content. Always, please share the information if you enjoy it. That helps me to get more views and to get the message out to more people. Thanks a lot, and have a wonderful day. Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode. I want to make it really easy for you to reach me. So just send me a text to 31996 and simply text the word growth, GROWTH. In fact, you can right now just say, hey Siri, send a message to 31996, and when Siri asks you what you want to send, just say growth. You can do the same thing with OK Google. Thanks a lot. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for listening to Grief to Growth. Brian hopes that you find this episode helpful and will come back for future episodes. Brian's best-selling book, Grief to Growth, Planted Not Buried, is a great resource for anyone who is coping with grief or knows someone who is. If you enjoy the podcast and would like to support it, there are 3 things you can do to help. The first is to share the podcast with someone that you think it will help. The second is to go to iTunes, rate, and review the episode. The third way you can support the podcast is by becoming a patron. Head over to www.patreon.com/grief2growth. That's patreon.com/grief, the number 2, growth, and sign up to make a small monthly donation. Patrons get access to exclusive bonus content and knowledge that you are helping to spread the message of grief to growth. For more about Brian and Grief to Growth, visit www.grief2growth.com.
Hi there. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the podcast, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What questions came up for you? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? I invite you to visit us at grieftogrowth.circle.so. That's grief, the number 2, growth.circle.so to continue the conversation with me and with other listeners. It's a space to sound off, to share reactions, and to go deeper into the topics from the show. I look forward to chatting more, and I hope to see you there.